Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because we have perhaps one of the most pivotal and hyped up events in Bitcoin history today when the leading presidential candidate gives a speech at the Bitcoin conference, while at the same time Bitcoin is facing a multi-month resistance level and is hinting at a potential breakout. And we're likely going to find out between now and tomorrow's close whether Bitcoin will finally break above this trend line that we've been below since March of this year and enter that left translated cycle scenario we've been monitoring for months now, or if this is going to end up being a sell the news event because of how overhyped it was and how high expectations are going into the speech, and it ends up resulting in a sell-off and a deeper correction before we build a base and see a rally later in the year around Q4 and that normal cycle scenario that I've been mentioning as my base case. And of course, this gets even more interesting when you add seasonality into the mix and what Bitcoin usually does in the summer. Almost every single summer outside of 2017 and 2021, when we had those mania years, Bitcoin almost always rallies into mid to late July and then rolls over. That's what we saw in 2015. In 2016, we just kind of saw a sell-off for the entirety of the summer, so that was a little bit different. But then in 2018, rally into mid to late July, roll over. 2019, same thing. 2020, same thing, of course, before we took off higher. And then, of course, 2022, same thing. 2023, same thing. And here we are in 2024, rallying into mid to late July before the two worst months for Bitcoin historically, August and September. And everybody is incredibly excited about a speech at a Bitcoin conference. And we know how these tend to be sell the news events. We know conferences in general tend to be sell the news events. So I'm open to any outcome, but for me, it looks way more likely that the summer seasonality is going to continue, and the sell the news event that we've seen historically from Bitcoin conferences and hyped up events that everybody keeps talking about leading up to them, especially when you rally into the event. Normally, that's a combination for a sell the news event because the event itself just can't live up to the expectations and meet the hype that the market had already priced in going into it. And of course, seasonality is just another variable that's adding to my thesis. And speaking of summer seasonality, I'm going to be traveling and taking a trip with my family for the next 2 weeks, so it's going to be very hard for me to upload YouTube videos, but I'll try to make up for it by being as active as I possibly can be on Twitter and share all my thoughts there. And of course, it's unfortunate that we have all of these amazing catalysts and so much to talk about, but I'll try to cover it all on Twitter by being more active there than I am right now, because I won't be able to make videos. And if we go ahead and take a look at this weekly candle for Bitcoin so far, it does look bullish if we can hold this going into the close. But of course, a lot of that can change between now and the end of this conference. But as of right now, if we maintain this large wick and see a bullish close, perhaps we could continue higher. But I feel like perhaps stocks are giving us a bit of a hint as to what's going to come next for Bitcoin, because we are seeing a bit of a cool off and correction in stocks right now. And we know that historically, Bitcoin is very correlated to the S&P 500. So maybe Bitcoin has been able to ignore this correction in stocks because of all the hype surrounding this event. But tomorrow is going to be very eye-opening because we're going to see if perhaps Bitcoin is leading the way and stocks are going to reverse, or if Bitcoin was just rallying in anticipation of the conference and is going to end up mean reverting to what stocks are doing once the conference is behind us, if that speech doesn't live up to the market's expectations. And of course, we know a lot of this correction in stocks is due to the uncertainty leading up to this election. We know that markets hate uncertainty, and I expect a lot of volatility between now and the elections in November. So I'm trying to remain relatively cautious and remind myself of the seasonality we see in the summer historically for Bitcoin and the normal cycle base case scenario, because I don't expect anything incredible to happen on the bull side as long as we have this uncertainty. And speaking of uncertainty, there's still a lot of uncertainty surrounding macro and what the Fed is going to do with monetary policy. Right now, consensus is that we get our first rate cut in September, but Powell's comments at the FOMC meeting next week are also going to be very pivotal for markets, especially because we ended up getting that flat reading on core PCE, and it's going sideways now instead of continuing to work towards the Fed's target of 2%. And of course, we have been seeing weakness in the labor market, and we're going to see what his comments on that are going to be, depending on what we end up seeing for the next unemployment rate print. But for now, September, even though it feels close, is still a ways away in terms of the market's perception. And we're going to have to monitor this economic data as it comes out to see what happens with inflation and the labor market, because we know rate cut expectations have a huge impact on the dollar index, which continues to go sideways here below resistance. So perhaps FOMC next week is going to be the deciding factor of whether the dollar index rolls over here or reclaims those major moving average and this swing low that we had back in May and continues grinding higher. And of course, if we want to see a big rally from Bitcoin in the short term, we want to see the dollar index roll over and sell off aggressively, because that's what was required for Bitcoin's last two mania phases that all of us hope for. And that's also when we tend to see our alt seasons as well, when you see major outperformance from the altcoins compared to Bitcoin. And speaking of altcoins, we have to cover our good friend Ethereum. Weekly candle still doesn't look great. We really don't want to close below this mid-level and 20-week moving average if we're going to be bullish in the short term. Of course, a lot of what Ethereum does is going to depend on what happens with Bitcoin here and what happens with this Bitcoin conference. But as of right now, nice to see that little bit of a bounce and wick. And at least it's not a bearish engulfing candle yet. Of course, we still have our close over 24 hours away. So a lot can happen with all the eyes on the Bitcoin conference right now, but we're not really seeing great stuff when it comes to the inflows. I do understand that Bitcoin sold off after its ETF launch as Grayscale sold their Bitcoin, and maybe a lot of the investors in the Grayscale Bitcoin fund moved to lower fee options. But what's very different this time around is we're still getting net outflows. And if we compare that to Bitcoin's first week, even though Grayscale was selling hundreds of millions, a lot of it was rotating to the other ETFs, and a lot of it was still coming in as organic demand. And we ended up with positive inflows every single day that first week. But this time for Ethereum, the inflows we're seeing are a lot lower than the Grayscale outflows, and we're ending up with net outflows. So I still think Ethereum will do well in the long term. I do think these ETFs were overhyped because Ethereum doesn't have the same demand that Bitcoin does because of Bitcoin's brand recognition. And I do think institutions are less likely to buy these ETFs because they'd rather hold Ethereum somewhere where they're going to get that staking yield, because that additional 3 to 4% can make a huge difference if you have a lot of capital in the asset. As for Solana, still an incredibly good looking chart. Of course, we're going to have to wait for the close for this one as well. But as you can see, we've been consolidating for months now. And so far, we've had a nice retest of the mid-level and perhaps that 20-week moving average region. And if Bitcoin ends up having any one of these bullish scenarios, it's incredibly likely, in my opinion, that Solana significantly outperforms because of how much hype and excitement is surrounding this asset and the user growth we've been seeing. So I'm very happy it's in my portfolio. Honestly, there are days where I consider just selling my Ethereum and just splitting it between Bitcoin and Solana, because yes, Ethereum likely outperforms Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is less risk in case we do end up seeing a deeper correction. And then Solana likely outperforms Ethereum to the upside. So I think I'm going to keep it as is for now because, I've held Ethereum for a long time and I believe in it in the long term, but my Solana position is slowly growing now that I've taken some profits on Ethereum. And of course, Solana has been performing a lot better over the past few months. So for now, we're going to have to wait and see. As long as we maintain above this reclaim level, there aren't any huge warning flags quite yet. But of course, the normal cycle scenario is still my base case. The rally and the party really get started in October, in the beginning of Q4, once we put all of this bad summer seasonality behind us. So hopefully nothing crazy happens while I'm on my vacation and traveling. But if something does, I will definitely cover it on Twitter. And I'm going to be closely monitoring that 61.5K level to make sure Bitcoin maintains above it. Of course, I'm still open to lower targets. We're not guaranteed to get there, and I do think the low 40s is unlikely, but if we do end up getting there, it's just that much more of an opportunity in my opinion, because I believe in this asset in the long term. And even though I'm not stampeding to buy Bitcoin at 68,000, I still think it's fair value if somebody has zero exposure or has some new cash they want to put into the market. But of course, you're not going to 10x your money this cycle by buying Bitcoin at these prices. But I'm also not that excited to sell at these prices either, because I do think there's a lot more upside potential in the long term, because I'm very bullish this asset in the long term, just like I'm bullish the S&P 500 and other risk assets, because currency devaluation is a trend that isn't going away anytime soon. But anyway, let me know what you expect. Are the hopes and dreams for the left translated cycle scenario still alive, or do you think it's going to be a normal cycle or failed cycle? Would love to know what you guys expect. You guys know my base case is normal cycle, where we take off in Q4 and perhaps top sometime in Q2 2025. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.